So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out. So what we want to do is cultivate a capacity for kindness. So, close your eyes. Take a few moments to breathe in and breathe out.
Hello, chat. Wow, this shirt seems really bright. That's kind of crazy. Hold on. Do I need to wear a different color? 1 second, chat. Let's try turning these off. Let's see if that makes a difference. Does that help? A little bit. Maybe not too much. How are y'all doing today? It's been a little while. Been a hot second. Did we stream on Monday? I don't even remember. Oh, yeah, I did that thing with Charlie. Nice pants? Yeah. Mental Health May? Yeah. We're a little bit, like most of the community, we're a little bit behind in life. Yeah, we did a 1 hour stream. That's right. So how are y'all doing today? Everything going good? Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alo Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I'm a psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice, and everything is just for educational purposes only. So pretty excited to be back with y'all, chat. Thank you so much for all the subs and donations and stuff like that during May. All that went to the Healthy Gamer Foundation, so we really appreciate the support. A couple of things, we're just going to be doing like standard stream stuff today. So we've got a couple of really cool posts that I'm excited about. And it seems like there are people mowing the lawn. Can you all hear that? Hey, Stu Ailes. Hello, first time on Dr. K's stream. Welcome, Stu Ale. Quali, welcome for your first time live. InviteBit, you're doing well. Cool. You can't hear that? Fantastic. So we're going to be looking at a couple of interesting things today. So I don't know that today it's just stuff that I feel like talking about. So we're going to do some stuff around dating because I've been trying to understand online dating for a little while now. And I think I've come to a couple of conclusions. So we're going to be talking a little bit about online dating. There's also a really cool post from the meditation subreddit about whether meditation is a placebo or not. And I think there's a lot of confusion around meditation and like how it works. So some people will say things like, oh, I meditated for, a little while and it helped while I was meditating. But as soon as the meditation ends, like the benefit goes away. So it's really interesting because we have enough now basic science and clinical research to where we can understand what the mechanisms of meditation are. And it's super interesting because there's like a particular benefit that happens with 8 minutes, another benefit that happens at 8 weeks, and a third benefit that happens at 8 months. And each of these has a discrete physiologic or neuroscientific mechanism, which sort of explains these different things that people say about the benefits of meditation. So we're going to be diving into that. For those of y'all that are relatively new to the community, that may seem a little bit strange, but I think a lot of people in our community are really, really interested in meditation and are like interested in more kind of advanced learnings. And then we're going to be talking some about dealing with parents. So this is something that, having healthy conversations with parents, setting limits with parents, being able to engage with parents is something that I think people have been more and more and more interested in terms of our community. I think as we've sort of like expanded like into building healthy relationships, I think it's something that's become more and more important. So sometimes parents will have a very, very set idea about what you should be doing in life. And there may be sort of cultural influences. They may have done things a particular way and they really want you to do them a particular way. And it can be very hard to communicate with them. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that. If I've been meditating for 5 years and see no benefits, am I doing it wrong? Possibly. But that's where I think you've got to be a little bit careful because are you doing it wrong or are you not able to notice? So this is something that I think in general society undervalues is the effect of perception. So human perception is fundamentally flawed. And so like so many people will come to conclusions, right? Like this doesn't work for me or it isn't working, or they will attribute particular things. Like if you're a doomer, like, oh, the world is going to hell and you have a lot of evidence to support it, but you don't really acknowledge that your perception is probably shaping the way that you view the world and the conclusions that you come to. So that's where, like, I think the everyone's focused on sort of outcomes. So if you look at a lot of like what's going on in the world, how critical are people about the information that they use to form conclusions? Everyone thinks they're critical about it. But the truth is, especially based on like internet algorithms, that's becoming less and less the case, right? Because the internet algorithm is going to feed you whatever you believe, because if it feeds you stuff that engages with you, then you'll click more. So this, by the way, is something that we go into a lot of detail in. So we've been filming, for those of you that don't know, we made another guide. It's in post-production, so we're done with the filming. So Dr. K's Guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff. And it's kind of like weird that that's what we called it, but that's really what it was. That's really what it is. So for a long time, a lot of people like just struggle to do stuff, and we call it all kinds of different things like productivity or motivation or procrastination. But at the end of the day, like this is a guide about like how to do stuff. So it goes into where do your desires come from? What is the connection between wanting to do something and being able to do it? What are the different components that like get in the way? Because like we all want to do stuff, but no one teaches us like how to do stuff. What is the fundamental scientific process behind wanting to accomplish something and actually doing it? And everyone sort of talks about productivity tips and stuff like that, but they ignore so many different pieces of the equation. And this is why, like, you know, in the history of humanity, we have the most access to productivity resources and the most solutions to like getting stuff done. We have books about it. We have YouTube videos about it. We've got productivity gurus. We've got Twitch streamers like myself that try to help people do things. And all throughout that, like, even though we have all these resources, it's not like everyone is doing stuff, right? It's not like when you go on Twitter, you say everyone's like, yeah, like everyone's doing awesome. It's like, actually the struggles are increasing and increasing and increasing. So how can we understand like what's missing? And the truth is because we're missing huge swaths of it. So in the guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff, we go into a particular branch of meditation, which is very, very helpful for this, which is pratyahara, which is the control of our senses. And when we're able to control our senses, we're actually like really, really good at like controlling our desire and focusing our mind. So if you think about what distracts you from doing stuff, it's like your senses or memory impressions from the senses. So I should be studying, but my mind wants to like play this game or watch this show. And like, where did that desire come from? It came from the sense organs. So the guide to ADHD and Doing Stuff is really all about understanding the process between conception and action. What are all the different components of it? We do what we normally do, where we dig into clinical stuff. We dig into neuroscience. It's very, very neuroscience heavy, by the way. So take that for what it is. And we go into a lot of like meditation, spirituality, Eastern psychology perspectives, and we all combine it into like helping people just do stuff. And the biggest thing that I learned in India is like when I was failing out of college, people would keep on telling me, you need to focus. You need to focus on studying. You need to do better. But not a single person taught me how. I never met a single person in the United States who was like, here is how you get your mind to do what you want it to. Here is why you can't focus. Here's the equation of focus. And so a lot of people are also wondering, what does ADHD have to do with doing stuff? A couple of things. The first is that ADHD is a disorder of attention. And fundamentally, doing stuff means directing your attention in the right place, right? When I'm thinking about video games and trying to study, my attention is over here when it should be over here. So controlling attention is correlated with being able to do stuff. So the times of your life where you've accomplished more, chances are your attention was in the right place. The other reason that we include ADHD here is because the whole world is getting more ADHD. So we're seeing a rise in terms of diagnosis, but we're also seeing that the average person who does not meet clinical criteria for ADHD has their attention being more and more fractured by technology. So there's a lot of stuff in the guide about technology habits, technology hygiene, and what technology is doing to our brains and how to overcome that. There's also some stuff like other side stuff that we kind of add on. Like there's a couple of videos for parents who have kids with ADHD, or how to set technology limits and things like that. So there's some stuff over there, but that's kind of like what we put together. And, the way that we determine what kind of guides to make is like we try to figure out what helps people the most, what has the most value, what delivers the most value. And I think that honestly, just teaching people how their mind works and how, if you set an intention, how to accomplish it is like the single most important thing that we could teach y'all. And that's why we made a guide about it. So it's available for pre-sales now. I don't know exactly when it's going to be released. So it's like in post-production and stuff like that, but hopefully in a couple of months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. But yeah, so hopefully it'll help y'all. Yeah, so someone known is saying I deleted TikTok. That app is so addicting. Yeah, it's tricky, right? It's not just that the app is addicting, it's what addiction to the app costs you. It's fine for it to be addicting, but what's the price you pay for your addiction? How much does your GPA drop? How much less sleep do you get? What impact does it have on your mood? And yeah, so there's a Stream Elements link right there, which I can post now. But let's... should someone delete a dating app if it starts to become addicting? The answer is that depends. So this is the other thing that I like about the guide and in general about our approach. People will oftentimes ask yes or no questions. But the world is not yes or no. Should you delete your dating app if it's addicting? Their knee-jerk response is yes. But here's the other thing that the guide goes into a lot. Should you delete the dating app? It doesn't matter what you should do. It matters what you can do and how to be able to do more. So here's something interesting, like by definition, okay, we go into this a lot. If there's something you should do, by definition, you're not doing it, right? Because we don't say we should do the things that we already do. I don't say I should shower every day. Should, by definition, is stuff that you don't do. So trying to set your goals based on shoulds is a fundamentally flawed strategy. You're handicapping yourself from the get-go. That's not what actually gets people to do stuff. People should quit smoking. People should drink less. People should spend more time doing productive things and less time on the internet. But we don't. So this is what the guide actually contains, is like, why don't we do the things that we should do? Because we all get caught up in shoulds, but like it doesn't matter. Right? Like, you should do all kinds of stuff. You should wake up at 5 a.m. every day. You should meditate for an hour. You should exercise after that. You should eat healthy. You should be more compassionate, more empathic. You should give people a chance, and you should believe in people, and you should believe in yourself, and you should do all kinds of crap. The whole challenge is that like our mind sets our goals based on shoulds, but there's no energy behind the should. Does that make sense? No, so Mike Papa Oscar is saying, so you need to be fake. The opposite. So should is fake, right? It's all the stuff that you don't naturally want to do. It's all the goals that are being given by other people. Right? So instead, what you should do is tap into your authenticity and uncover like natural and healthy sources of motivation. Instead of trying to do what you should do, like discover what you actually care about and then move towards that. And that's when you'll get like the most motivation and the most productivity because you actually care about it. Alicia Fear is saying, I should tap into authenticity 100%. Okay, man, they're really working at it out there. Y'all really can't hear that? A bit, okay. All right, tiny bit, okay, cool. So let's go ahead and take a look at posts. Morbing time? Yeah, what happened with the re-release of Morbius? Did it flop again? Flop in time? Okay, let's do this. Nope. Not that. Okay. All right, let's take a look. So here are our options. Let me see if I can set up a poll, chat. Twitch.tv. Oh no, am I logged in? Nope, not logged in. Gee. Okay. I'm just seeing an ad when I try to do. Okay, so hopefully we've got mods around. So here are our options for the day, okay? Y'all ready? So we've got a couple of options. One is I 28 feel like there's no place for me in society. And this is sort of related to this post, which is mildly incelish rant. Right? So this is sort of exploring what's going on with dating and what are some of the fundamental mistakes that we make when considering romantic relationships and why we make those mistakes to begin with and what to do about it. Second option is I've been meditating for only for several weeks, but I see temporary results every time I meditate. Is this placebo? So this is going into how meditation actually works, because this is kind of confusing for people, because like some people will say like, oh, I've been meditating for 5 years and it's transformed my life. I see things differently. My relationships are different. I have an entirely new perspective. And then when you sit down to meditate, like you're hearing about this thing and like you meditate and like, yeah, you do actually feel peaceful for a little bit. And then like the meditation ends and then that feeling goes away. So like, what's the deal? And so also related to that is I meditated 1 hour per day for 365 days. Here's why I stopped. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about that. And then the next thing that we can talk a little bit about is I, 24F, stuck to my own decision, but my parents disown me because they cannot respect me as a person. So this is going to be a little bit about how to manage parents, boundaries, communication. So what do y'all want to do? Okay, it looks like most people are interested in dating. All right. Thank you, mods. Okay. So we're going to do these in order. Okay? Yeah, well, it's more about order. And then depending on how much we get off track, we may not have time for one, but like we're going to try to do all three. Okay? Promise, promise. All right. Thank you very much, chat, for voting. It really, really helps me in terms of figuring out, how to spend my time. All right, so let's start with this. Okay. I was mildly incelish rant. I was recently told by a girl I was seeing that she wanted to be with someone she could be proud of, someone who is better than herself. Not me, according to her. First of all, ouch. Not the first time this happens. I'm not tall or muscular. I do not exude confidence. I do not behave in the most conventional, manly way. It's not who I am, nor who I want to be. I've cut ties with my family years ago. I've struggled with anxiety my entire life and also depression in recent years. My support network is incredibly small, and I'm having to learn alone as an adult a lot of basic stuff most kids learn from their parents: self-love, confidence, relationship skills. Despite all that crap, I am an engineer in one of the biggest tech companies in the world. I make 20 times my country's average salary and am on my way to retire before 40. I taught myself English through games and music. I lost over 50 pounds in the last year and am now working to get a body I can be proud of. I've been working on my mental health since the beginning of the pandemic. Anxiety is no longer a struggle, and despite all this rant, the world seems a lot easier to navigate nowadays, thanks to Dr. K and to therapy. I don't have a lot of friends, but I try my best to be there for them and help them whenever they need me. They treasure me, and I treasure them too. The girl I mentioned above seems to be/have none of these things, by the way. I'm writing this because I'm truly proud of the person I am and the things I've accomplished. However, it seems like most people don't see me like that. When it comes to people and relationships, it feels as if hard work and consistency can never beat natural selection. Nobody cares about all my progress. No amount of effort or goodwill seems to be enough. If a man is born 5 inches taller, the world treats him like gold. If a man is taught self-love and confidence from loving parents, all doors seem to open for him at the slightest touch. Meanwhile, I'm invisible. I have to scream just so people know I'm here. Whenever other people are involved, everything is a lot harder. Everything I get has to be earned. I try to think positively. All the extra hard work will make me stronger, more resilient, smarter. All the tangible, useful qualities I've been acquiring will outweigh the fact that I'm 5'8" and a bit shy. Yet, I'm still alone. Maybe I'm wrong. So I'm starting to think no amount of effort will be enough. I'm starting to think I'm doomed to run in circles. No one will ever see the awesomeness and the potential I see in myself. What's the point? So I could use some external inputs and new perspectives on this. I'm running out of ideas, patience, and hope. By the way, this is not my usual mood. I had a bad week. Sorry if it sounds arrogant, envious, entitled, incelish. Hope it's okay to vent here. Thanks for reading. So this is a fantastic post. I definitely feel for the person. So this is what's really unfortunate is everyone tells us if you want to be successful in dating, don't focus on the person you're trying to hook up with. Focus on yourself, right? The formula for success in dating is to work on yourself. Get in shape. Like this person lost 50 pounds. Become professionally successful. This person makes 20 times the national average in terms of salary and is on their way to retire by the age of 40. They've taught themselves English. They've been working on their mental health. They're doing everything right, right? So sometimes we get this feedback from people that, oh, if you want to be successful in dating, do these things. And if you do these things, you will be successful. Because these are the things that you can control. There's some stuff that you can't control in life, like your height or your ethnicity or the parents that you're given. But what you can control is the effort that you put in, whether you exercise or not, whether you do go to therapy, whether you watch our stuff or do coaching or whatever. And so it's incredibly frustrating when you do everything right. And when you do everything right and the person you're dating says she wants to be with someone that she can be proud of, someone who is better than herself, and that isn't you and breaks up with you, it's what's the point, right? You're doing everything right. You're trying to believe. You're trying to really, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. You try to think positively. All the extra work makes me stronger, more resilient, all this kind of stuff, right? What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But when you look at the rest of the world, you see other people just have it easier than you do. And it feels as if hard work and consistency is never going to beat not only natural selection, but inborn advantages. You can be poor, born poor, and work your entire ass off. You can work 2 jobs and 80 hours a week, and you'll never make as much as someone who's heir to a fortune of $1 billion. And this is what the world looks like to us sometimes. So we're going to dive into a little bit about how to approach this kind of situation and what you can do about it. So this is where there are a couple of different things that we're going to talk about. The first is the expectation of fixing things before the start of a relationship, or what people, actually, let me think about how to say that again. The first thing that we're going to talk about is actually emotional impact and how emotional impact affects our view of the world, okay? This is also going to become a little bit important when we talk about meditation later. The second thing that we're going to do is try to understand what is the relationship between working on yourself and dating success. And those are the 2 things that we're going to be focused on. So the first is our mind forms conclusions. So if we can look at this person, and I really appreciate this post for many reasons. So they're they've done everything right. They're an engineer. They have a successful career. They're losing weight. They kind of don't see themselves as confident. And then they get dumped. And they even kind of acknowledge that this is not my usual mood. I had a bad week. Sorry if it sounds arrogant, envious, entitled, incelish. Hope it's okay to vent here. It's totally fine to vent here, especially in this kind of way, because this person is being a little bit reflective, right? It's not just about venting. They're sort of pointing out like what they've done. You can sort of see it in terms of the upvotes, right? You know, it's 93% upvote rate. So I think people are totally fine with this kind of thing, because it's not just doomer kind of mentality. It's like this person's actually making effort at understanding their beliefs and sort of saying like, I'm doing everything right and I'm still getting screwed. So the first thing to understand is when you feel emotionally upset, what do y'all think that does to the conclusions that your mind forms? Right? Like, what does it do to them? So when we feel upset, it has a couple of interesting effects on our mind's ability to learn. So when we form a conclusion, we're essentially learning. So there's something really interesting, which is if you look at the hippocampus, which is the part of our brain that learns, it's very, very tightly connected to the limbic system and especially the amygdala, which is the part of our brain that experiences emotion, especially negative emotion. So learning is very, very emotional in nature. We'd like to think that we're rational human beings, and the biggest influence on our learning are actually our cerebral cortices. The cortices are like the outside of our brain, which are sort of like where a lot of our human ability to think comes from. All animals have actually, I don't know about all, but mammals certainly. All of them have amygdalas, all of them have limbic systems, and all of them have hippocampi. But the cerebral cortices is really what sets us apart. So we'd like to think that a lot of our learning comes from rational thought. But the truth of the matter is that the most powerful moments in our life in terms of when we learn lessons are emotional in nature. The challenge is that the lessons that we learn may not entirely be correct. So I want you all to think about, like moments in your life where you were like, swore something to yourself, like never again, right? Like if there are moments in your life where you sort of adopted a behavior or perspective, the more powerful that perspective is, the more emotional it is. And if you kind of think about it, like we understand this even in terms of movies, because in movies, like people don't, like when you see someone having a transformative experience where they're like never again, and they like learn and change and transform their lives, it's not an analytical experience. They're not going and sitting in a philosophy classroom and then going and Googling things and then reading Wikipedia and then sitting there and like reading books on Nietzsche. That's not where we see human transformation happen. And we sort of resonate with this as human beings because human transformation and learning things is something that's emotionally powerful. It's like this moment where someone like gets bullied and they're like left bloody on the floor as kids like laugh and walk down. And that's the moment, right? That's the moment when you swore never again. And then you see the protagonists get up and they start exercising and they learn mixed martial arts and they do all this stuff and like they transform their lives and get things together. And then you have your final climax and showdown. It's all emotion. Now the challenge, so we learn easily from emotions. The challenge is that what we learn is tricky. And the more emotional we are, the lessons that we learn sink in deeper, but they're actually less correct in a sense. And this is the tricky thing about these kinds of emotional situations. So people have, this person is like, it's reasonable what they're saying. They're like, I did everything right. I did my research. I dug deep. I worked hard, got my ass into therapy, got my ass to lose 50 pounds, became professionally successful, worked on myself, I wasn't taught these things like self-love. I like didn't have parents who loved me. So like I'm doing all this stuff and it's friggin' exhausting. And this is what happens to me. How can I not be screwed? Because I did everything that I was supposed to. And I'm still not getting what I was expecting. So then what happens is your mind comes to the conclusion it's all about natural selection. It's all about the luck of the draw. But if you think about it, what's the emotional energy behind that conclusion? It's resentment. It's dashed expectations. It's hurt. Because if your partner who you care about tells you, like everything you're doing is not good enough, I need to be with someone who's better than you. Like, what does it tell you about yourself? What does it tell you about the value of all of the effort that you're putting in? It tells you that the value isn't enough. And then you learn that lesson, that all this crap is a waste of time. Because if it would have worked, then I wouldn't have gotten dumped. Right? That's the lesson that your mind learns. And so what do we do about this? So like if you're sitting on the outside, you can look at this and you can clearly see that adopting your girlfriend's value system, who by the way does none of the things that you do and has not accomplished nearly as much as you have, her judgment is not actually like an accurate representation of most of life. The challenge is if you're in this person's shoes, like that sort of doesn't matter, right? Because at the end of the day, you got dumped and it hurts. Like, so other people sort of telling you like, bro, you're a catch. Like, she's crazy. Like, don't worry about what she thinks. There are going to be a lot of women out there who will be very interested in like what you have to offer and would be very lucky to date someone who is focused on their physical health, professionally successful, and like goes to therapy and like works on themselves. Like, that's awesome, right? Like, that's fantastic. So people will sort of say things like there's other fish in the sea, don't let it get to you, things like that. But I want you all to acknowledge that the conclusions that your mind comes to are going to be more exacerbated the more hurt you feel. Because in this moment, you feel like it's not doing anything. And that's sort of true because it didn't work, quote unquote, with her, right? But there's still like value to what you're doing, which it's hard to believe because you feel resentment. So what do you do in this kind of situation? The first thing that you've got to do is, as this person's already done, and that's why I'm really like honestly proud of this person, because they recognize that these thoughts are coming from a week where their mood has been very bad. And we've got to be really, really careful about forming permanent conclusions from temporary moods, right? So there's a book of Russian fairy tales that I really enjoyed growing up. And I even now read them to my kids. And there's like one line in those fairy tales that I think is really interesting, which is morning is wiser than evening. And I thought that was like kind of interesting. I read it in the fairy tale and then I sort of noticed that was actually true. That like when you wake up first thing, like the world can be falling apart the night before, but when you wake up the next day, like things have a different perspective. Like your perspective will change over time, especially as your like amygdala starts to calm down, as your limbic system starts to calm down. You've got to be extra careful if like you got broken up with and they're texting you the next day and you're thinking about it again and stuff like that. But a clear head forms the best conclusions. So if your mind is kind of messed up, just be careful about forming conclusions based on a temporary emotion. Now, what happens for a lot of people is this experience will happen again and again and again, and then the emotion won't be temporary. You'll be in a relatively permanent state of doom. And then you become a doomer or an incel. You reinforce this kind of emotional input through joining things like echo chambers, right? So you'll join some like 4chan forum or something like that, or some like incel subreddit or whatever. And then like you'll get a lot of people who are like feeding you the same emotion. They're feeding you their anger and their resentment. And now suddenly like you're perceiving all this stuff and you found the one corner of the internet where everyone has the same experience you do. And then since everyone is having the same experience, you start to believe it's true. As you start to believe it's true, you start to run into a lot of problems. Because now like you've sort of formed a fundamentally incorrect conclusion. So the first thing is like process your emotions. First of all, it's okay that she broke up with you. Like, this is where you've got to understand that when people break up with you, this is something that's so hard to understand. A lot of times the reason that people break up with you has nothing to do with you and has everything to do with them. And they'll even say, the big irony here is that half the time when they say, it's not you, it's me, that's the self-aware person who actually it is you and it's not them. But the people who blame you for the breakup are often the ones at fault. They're the ones who should be saying, it's not you, it's me, right? Like that's the really bizarre thing. The less self-aware you are, the more you blame other people for your problems. And she's like, you're not good enough for me. And it's like, here you are losing 50 pounds in a year, which is amazing, by the way, working on yourself and you're not good enough for her. That's totally fine. Let her go find someone who's good enough for her. I think it's gonna be hard to find someone as good as you are. But this is where it's so tricky because what we do is internalize the judgments of the people who break up with us. We internalize the judgments of the people who reject us. But that's just their judgment coming from their flawed mind, right? If she's looking for someone who's like so great, like why doesn't she get in shape? Why doesn't she become more, professionally successful? So this is what's really hard is when we feel hurt and we get this kind of feedback, we don't think about it critically. right? Because we got hurt. It didn't work, period. That's our emotional circuitry active. That's why we don't think about it critically. So here's the other thing to understand about the amygdala and the cerebral cortex. When the amygdala is active, it shuts off the cerebral cortex. When the cerebral cortex is active, or the frontal lobes are active, it does its best to shut down the amygdala. These things have a mutually inhibitory function. So when you get really, really emotional, your emotional mind literally shuts down your ability to think critically. And that's evolutionary, by the way. So as it turns out, when you're in a survival situation, you don't want to be thinking critically. Actually, what you want to be doing is acting very quickly and jumping to conclusions. Because the kinds of situations that these brains evolved for were not complex internet relationships involving making 20 times your salary and losing weight and all this kind of crap. Our brain evolved for snap decisions in emotional situations. Like, I see a tiger in the jungle. Do I attack it or do I run away? There's no nuance. There's no what is the tiger? Is the tiger reincarnated from my dad? Is the tiger hungry? Is it friendly? What does it mean that there's a tiger here? Should I kill it? What is the morality of killing a tiger? Is it okay to kill it? Is it okay to wound it? That's not how we think when we see a tiger. So there's even something really interesting that we know that adrenaline does something really interesting. It takes our peripheral vision. So if you take your hands and you wiggle them out here, you can actually see that, right? You can see our peripheral vision is actually quite wide. It's almost 180 degrees, which is weird because we don't really think about being able to see out of the side of our head. But you can do the wiggle, you'll see it. You can even go further back and keep going further back until you don't see it. I can see it kind of right here, okay? The other interesting thing is that's when adrenaline activates, it takes our peripheral vision and it collapses it to a 30-degree cone. So all you can see is what's in front of you when you're emotionally activated. And it also does the same thing cognitively. So here's the full range of what I can consider when I'm calm. But when I become emotional, the world becomes black and white. And this is where, if you've ever had a political discussion with someone you disagree with, you'll understand exactly what I mean. They cannot see beyond 30 degrees, and neither can you. Both of you thinks you have full peripheral vision, but that's not the case. So when you're emotionally activated, all the conclusions that you're going to come to, or chances are they're going to be flawed. It doesn't mean that there isn't something to be learned there from this, but chances are the takeaway may not be what you initially come up with, right? The takeaway may be something along the lines of it's okay for her to break up with you if she's looking for more than what you are. But just because she's looking for more does not mean that you are not enough. You may not be enough for this one person, but it doesn't mean that you're not enough for 1,000 other people out there. And I've talked to, worked with, and been friends with, over 100 women who what they're looking for is exactly what this person is describing, which is a man who's somewhat emotionally available, working on themselves, professionally successful, and getting in shape, right? That's what a lot of women are looking for. Which now comes to sort of another piece that I want to talk about. Actually, so let's just pause for a second. So at the end of the day, we're told from a dating perspective that we should do particular things and then we will be successful. And it makes sense, right? Because you can't sort of force someone else to like you. The most you can really do is work on yourself and make yourself more attractive to people that you want to date. So you can become professionally successful. You can get into shape more. You can learn how to cook and things like that. You can work on your own self-confidence, negative self-talk, all these kinds of things. And so the thing is doing all that crap takes a lot of energy and effort. It's not easy to lose 50 pounds. It's not easy to make so much money that you're on track to retire by the age of 40. It's not easy to do that stuff. And you do that stuff and you sweat and you toil and you exert everything you've got. And then your girlfriend dumps you. And then you're F it. Right? There's just no way to win. I was informed that if I do these things, I will find love and I will be happy. And then when that doesn't happen, you feel really resentful. And when you feel resentful, you've got to be really careful about the conclusions that you form. for all the above mentioned stuff because our brain is forming conclusions. It wants to form conclusions. That's exactly when our brain forms the most powerful conclusions, is when we feel hurt and resentful. The problem is that we lose sight of things in those states. And so this is the kind of thing where like the most important thing is to like emotionally decompress, acknowledge the resentment, acknowledge how bad it feels, to actually be crushing it and for it to not matter. Like, does that make sense to y'all? Like how devastating that must be? If you're doing everything right, you're crushing it on every objective measure or on a couple of really big ones. And for you to still get dumped makes it feel like all of the effort that you're doing is worthless. And that's the really tricky thing, because if in that moment you give up and you start letting yourself go, then you're actually screwing yourself. Right? And so that's where like it's really, really important to, first of all, like forgive yourself. Secondly, like deal with that resentment. Thirdly, understand that if someone breaks up with you, they may perceive that as a shortcoming from you, but like there's all kinds of stuff going on in their mind. And you'll sort of know this. Like if you guys have had parents who have very high expectations, nothing you do is ever enough. Right? It's like, if you get an A, they want an A+. If you got the silver medal at the Olympics, they want a gold. And some people are looking for you to satisfy them. And no amount of effort that you put in will satisfy them. But that's where we've got to be really, really careful, because if you have those kinds of parents, that kid grows up feeling like they're not enough. But by any objective measure, they've got a 4.0 GPA and they're like an Olympic medalist. Like, what the hell? Like, what more do you want? And so some people are not content with a particular relationship. And what they do is they'll push that onto their partner. That the reason this relationship is not working is because of you. And the less they take responsibility, the more they shove the responsibility on you, the more doomed the relationship is, because they're not willing to accept responsibility. They're giving you the responsibility and your dumbass is taking it. So y'all are kind of happy that way. And then when you get broken up with, you feel bad. And they're like, yeah, they just weren't good enough for me. And even in that, there's like this like subconscious contract between like who's responsible for this relationship falling apart. And she's blaming you, and you're the one who's accepting the blame. And so you're like, okay, like then what do I do? And then you become resentful. And that's what's so challenging about these kinds of situations, is when you feel hurt, when you feel like you have when you're insecure and you get dumped by someone despite doing such a good job, your insecurity is so powerful that you never stop to consider, this person doesn't know what they want in a relationship. This relationship would have worked better if they had actually taken some responsibility. But we don't think that way when our limbic system is active, because that's a nuanced perspective. That comes from the cortices. And so the most important thing in these kinds of situations is to, first of all, acknowledge that no relationship breakup is one person's fault. Like, that's just not possible, or almost not possible, I would think. Most of the time, like 95% of relationships, if a relationship falls apart, it's composed of two people, therefore two people are responsible. And the less that your partner accepts responsibility for the breakup of the relationship, the less likely they are to be correct. And you've got to be careful, because if that feeds into your insecurity because you are working on yourself so hard, because by the way, you're 50 pounds overweight or 100 pounds overweight and you've lost 50 pounds. So boom, there's the insecurity, feeds into the whole thing, activates the amygdala and the limbic system. You blame yourself. You learn that the world is untrustworthy and there's no chance you've got. You let yourself go because it's so easy to let yourself go, because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. It's so easy to give up. And that's the real tragedy. It's not that you got dumped by someone who doesn't understand the value of who they're dating. The real tragedy is when they don't understand the value of what they're dating and you agree with them, when you adopt their perspective, because it feeds right into the insecurity that already exists. So if you're working on yourself and you get dumped because someone says you're not good enough, be a little bit careful. First of all, let yourself be resentful, acknowledge it, work through it, but be careful about the conclusions that you form. Because at the end of the day, if you're working on yourself, that really is the best thing that you can do. and be super careful about the success of a strategy based on a sample size of 1. So that's like the other like really simple thing, right? Like you can't base a strategy off of a sample size of 1. It's like, that's just not how things work like that, you know. So give yourself more opportunities, give yourself more chances, continue working on yourself, and eventually you'll run across someone who like sees the value in who you are. It's tough though. It ain't easy. Questions? What is your opinion on you must truly love yourself before you can truly love someone else? Completely disagree. That's kind of weird. Everyone says stuff like this, right? Because it's like a feel-good thing, like, oh, you must truly love yourself before you can love someone else. Bro, let me tell you what, or girl, it's so much easier to love another person than it is to love yourself. Right? Like, let's be honest here. Right? Like we like to think that we can't love. No, but like you can absolutely love someone before you love yourself. Loving yourself is not like, it's like the end of the road, not the first thing. I mean, like, y'all tell me if I'm wrong, but like, just think about your own life for a second, right? Have you truly loved someone? And do you truly love yourself? I'd venture that there's more of you that can say, yes, I've truly loved another human being, and I've not loved myself. So much easier. Now, I think the real tricky thing is that it's really hard to love yourself if you haven't been loved by another person. So oftentimes the way, it's really unfortunate, but the way that we learn to respect ourselves is actually through the respect of others. And we see this a lot in terms of like therapy and stuff, where you go somewhere and you have low self-worth and your therapist treats you with worth. And like, that's confusing for you at the beginning. You're like, wait, what? Like, why are you you're just treating me this way because you're my therapist, right? Like, you don't actually believe that. And then if you stick with it for a while, you'll start to realize, oh no, they actually like do believe that. And then you're like, oh, maybe I am worth something. So oftentimes it starts from someone else. This is one of the reasons in general. So when we're talking about dating and stuff, so one of the reasons I really, really like group coaching is because of this principle. So here are a couple of reasons why it's so hard to describe, but group coaching is awesome for a couple of these reasons. The first is that in general, in life, we tend to learn from our mistakes. The challenge is that we don't learn perfectly. So what that means is that we have to like make a mistake like 5, 6, 7 times before we learn from it, right? That's problem number one. So group coaching fixes this because other people are making mistakes too. And we can kind of like learn from their mistakes. And you may say like, but wait, how does that work? It's because when someone authentically shares an experience of themselves and you're there like learning how to listen to them properly and like ask insightful questions when it's facilitated by a coach who sort of like moves the conversation in the right way, you actually learn from them. And so even if you like watch our streams or our YouTube content and you feel personally attacked or you're learning a lesson from what we talk about, that has nothing to do with you. You can actually learn lessons from other people. That's the whole basis upon which AOE healing is built. It's that you don't have to screw up 8 times to learn 8 lessons. The other big irony is, as we've already discussed, when you actually make a mistake, you're so caught up in it. So anyone who this dating post that we just looked at, this person gets dumped by his girlfriend after he loses 50 pounds and he's on track to retire at the age of 40. And she says he's not good enough. When you're in that space, it's hard to see like how that's crazy and how you're actually doing a fantastic job. This is actually on her. The cool thing is that when you learn from other people's mistakes, you actually see it more clearly. And then what happens is you say, oh crap, I do the same thing. It's actually easier in a weird way to learn from someone else's mistakes because you are objective about it and they are subjective about it. When you're emotionally all messed up, you don't actually like learn, right? Because like the whole point of this post that we just saw is when you get dumped after doing everything right, you actually come to the erroneous conclusion that it doesn't matter because your mind is all screwed up. So the cool thing about group coaching is when one person makes a mistake, everyone learns from it. And hopefully those people will share their perspectives and bring that person back into alignment. And then it's the next person's turn to make a mistake. And essentially what happens is you've got 8 people, let's say hypothetically, all get dumped over the course of 6 months. And now you've learned how to handle 8 breakups because you see how each and every person handles the breakup. You help them get through it. And when you help them get through it, you learn a different way of talking to yourself. How do you learn different self-dialogue? You learn it by dialoguing with other people. And then when you get dumped and they treat you with value and worth, and remember, they're not your therapist, right? So the other group members, this is the other key thing. The other group members are paying to be there. You're not paying them to be there. And so getting the respect and worth when someone else tells you, hey, I think you're worth it, and I think someone would be lucky to date you. Here are the reasons that I think you're a valuable human being. Here are all the ways that you have helped me over the last 3 months. When you hear that from one of your peers, that's something that's incredibly powerful. And personal coaching is great, don't get me wrong. But like there's this aspect of like peer support and the respect of your peers that is actually really, really important. People have done studies on software developers. And what they discovered is the most important thing for a software developer is actually not the respect of your bosses, it's the respect of your peers. So peer support can have awesome impacts on self-worth. So what we tend to see is that group coaching works really well for people who are like students and people who are trying to navigate like common issues. So that's where like it really thrives because everyone's struggling to date, right? Like everyone's like trying to figure out this online dating business. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But the whole point is that like when you go through it and your mind is all messed up and people help you work through it, when they're helping you, that's when they themselves learn. Does that make sense? Like this is huge. And Irvin Yalom did a bunch of research on this. And what he kind of discovered was really important, that helping someone else through a problem equips you to deal with it. Because you've walked them through like the things that you say, right? Like you give them the dialogue and then some part of your brain knows what to say. Some part of your brain knows how to see value despite the person beating themselves up. And then when it happens in your own mind, you have some of that experience. And so like this is why group coaching I think is really powerful. From an outcome perspective, what we see is, just for the sake of completeness, we tend to see like standard metrics improve faster in personal coaching. The thing is, I think a lot of the stuff that improves in group coaching, we actually don't have good metrics for. So you'll get there sort of like in terms of reductions in depression, anxiety, life purpose, all that kind of stuff. But I think there's some of these other factors which we just don't have good instruments for. That's the real value. And that's why it's also confusing for people because they're like, why should I, I thought talking about my problems is something I do with an individual. And that can be useful too, don't get me wrong. But it's like really for shared problems. So if you suffer from something that someone else or like that's a common problem, then like group is better because group will like help you help other people through it. And when you help other people through it, you yourself are going to internalize it. And there's a lot of value to being able to be objective and learning from a problem as opposed to being subjective. Anyway, so that's, if y'all are interested, we actually have a new batch of coaches that are launching. So for about, I want to say a year or more now, about 16, 18 months, coaching, parts of coaching have been absolutely full. We've had some group spots available, but so we're kind of like, educating coaches as fast as we can. So we've got another batch of coaches that is like now actually finishing their certification period. So if y'all have been like waiting to get into coaching for a while, like by all means sign up because we've got some more capacity. We've really literally educated now 8 batches. We're on batch number 8 of coaches. And so like just a lot of people seem to be benefiting from it and it stays relatively full. So if y'all are interested, by all means, like sign up because we've got, more people coming and they're good. Like this batch is awesome. Cool. You submitted your application last week. Thank you. By the way, so just for those of y'all that are interested in being coaches, like it is getting competitive. So we get about, I want to say we review about 600 or 800 applications for about a dozen spots. So you should still apply if you're interested. Just don't, be surprised that. And it's not like we're looking for a particular thing. You don't need to have a 4.0 GPA. You don't need to have we look for people from our community who are really interested in like helping people with these things. That's really what we're looking for. It's paid. Homie Worky. A lot of people will try to volunteer, but I think it's very important that they get compensated for their time because they're delivering good value. Yeah, so you just need a high school degree or GED. You don't need any college. Nope, you don't need to be a psych major. This is where, so now we're getting into like applying to become a coach. Where like I'm not trying to encourage. I mean, if you want to apply, go for it. But we have no shortage of applications. What we're really here to do is like help people. So if this is something that appeals to you, by all means sign up. And groups especially are like, they're a little bit different. You've got to give it some time because people are sort of expecting like a curriculum, but it's like, I almost feel like group is like, it takes some time to get into the discussion. And once you get into the discussion, like it takes some time to see the results. That's just because real change happens slowly. Like if you're talking about change in your internal self-dialogue and like negative self-talk, you're not going to see that change over 3 weeks. It's not like someone says, hey, you need to stop talking to yourself that way. And it's like, boom, you stop talking to yourself that way the next week. It takes weeks of people talking to you in a particular way to alter that kind of self-dialogue. And that's what we see is like really transformative about it, is that it's slow, but like once it happens, people really start changing. I'm still thinking about one person who was addicted to video games, got dumped by their partner, got kicked out of the partner's apartment, and like absolutely put their life together with the supportive group. It was like really beautiful to see. And if you know who you are, if you're out there, props to you. Okay, we're getting off track here. So people are asking, is it part-time or full-time? So that's up to you. So a big thing that we sort of recognize is that people in our community like may not want a full-time job, or they have a full-time job and they want to do this kind of work. So it's like you kind of set your own hours. I think on average, our coaches work about 20 hours a week. Okay, let's talk a little bit. Y'all want to talk more about dating? So I want to talk to y'all about dating for a second. So this is great. So Brandcore X is asking, what do you think about the classic statement, have your crap together? I see this on dating apps all the time. So we're going to talk about dating apps for a second. Okay. And there's a lot about dating apps that we sort of don't appreciate or recognize, which is like there's a lot about the assumptions that dating apps have, which have become so true and commonplace that we've never really stopped to think about whether these are like conceptualized the right way or not. So let's start with a couple of things. The first is that dating apps ask you for a profile, right? And you put things into your profile. And so what that sort of gives us the idea of is like, since I can put my profession into my profile, I can put my height into my profile, I can put all these kinds of things into my profile, we assume that the features of the profile will determine dating success, because that's what I can put into the profile. The biggest confusing thing about dating apps, which is a little bit subtle, is that things that you can measure and stick on a profile may not correlate at all to dating success. Do y'all understand that? When people were developing dating apps, they didn't sit down and do a bunch of research what leads to the most successful relationships. What they'd ask themselves is, what can we capture in a profile that leads to success? because they're fundamentally bound by what the dating app can represent. They're fundamentally bound by a profile. And this is why a lot of people get confused about some of dating stuff. So people will sort of say, like we just had a post earlier where someone was saying, I'm professionally successful, I'm getting in shape, I'm doing all these things, and people don't seem to care. People don't seem to care. All they care about is height and weight and these kinds of things. And I even had a buddy who was in medical school with me. And so this person had some difficulty dating. And so when they went to medical school, they were like, oh, once I go to med school, the ladies will be all over me. Because ladies love doctors, right? Everyone's looking for a doctor. And once I become a doctor, it's going to be easy. I'm going to have more than I can handle. It's going to be great. And then finished med school, became a doctor, started making some money, and still struggles. And so then a lot of people will be super confused because they're like, I don't understand. I'm a nice guy. I'm professionally successful. I treat people right. I do all of these things. They look at their life, right? Because they've optimized what you can put into the app. I work well. I'm good at this. I'm good at this. All this stuff is listed on there. I put it all into the app. I'm confused. Why isn't this working out? And then they become resentful. So here's the key thing to understand about relationships. So everyone will say relationships are all about communication. The problem is that's not something you can stick in a dating app. So all these people who are doctors and still struggling to date, or people who think oh, I'm a nice guy, or I check all the boxes. Why am I still single? It's because checking the boxes has nothing to do with the actual interaction. People who are successful in dating, if you're wondering how can someone who's broke and a heroin addict continually find someone to date? It's because they're good at interpersonal skills, right? So if you sort of say that, okay, professions don't correlate with success in dating, and you're like, you throw up your hands. Or if you say money doesn't correlate with success in dating, or sometimes you think that money does correlate, and you just think you don't make enough, and everyone's looking for someone who makes more than you. But the fact remains that a lot of people who are unsuccessful, a lot of people who are under 6 foot, in fact, the majority of people who get married are under 6 feet. What the hell is going on there? Right? So you can say you can look at online dating and you can say oh, I'm under 6 feet. I'm screwed. Short kings, it's hard being a short king. And we'll form these conclusions because this is what the dating app is doing. It's just shaping our perception that these are the things that matter. But you have people out there who have all these requirements on dating apps, and they're still on dating apps because they're still single because they have all these requirements. And then we get into the conversation about lowering your standards and stuff like that. We'll talk about that in a second. But the key thing to understand is that if you're single, the single most important thing, it's not profession. It's not how tall you are, how muscular you are. In fact, there was recently a study that I cited, and then people were wondering about the citation and stuff. I looked at it more closely. So people looked at 6 sort of dimensions of dating success. And basically men procreating and also engaging in relationships. And the effect sizes for things that they looked like jaw size, muscularity was positively associated, but all the associations were tiny. Very, very small associations as you look at big meta-analyses. So essentially, what we sort of know is that people who are under 6 feet, make $40,000 a year, are still successful at dating, getting married, and having kids. So what's the deal? And then we have people who are very resentful because I'm a doctor. Where are all the women? Or I'm a doctor. Where are all the men? Right? I was told that this is how you become successful at dating. And the main thing is that everyone thinks that your success in dating has everything to do before the interaction. That's what everyone controls. You'll get that? So I need to go to the gym more. I need to get more professionally successful. I need to do all this stuff ahead of time, and then the interaction arrives. And what they're focusing on is I don't understand why people don't respect the fact that I'm this rich or this successful or all this kind of stuff. And what they end up doing is they don't focus on the interaction itself. right? And this is how people who are like on paper not good mates will end up in relationships, because they're actually good at like the communication and the interaction. And we've got this other group of people that's like obsessed with all the stuff before the interaction, right? I'm going to make more money. I'm going to get more in shape. I'm going to do this. I'm going to learn how to cook. Everyone says work on yourself. So I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to work on myself. I'm going to work on myself. And you work on yourself up until the interaction. And then like you never practice the interaction. You never practice communication skills. You don't like practice like what it's like to communicate and be with another person. Right? Like, do you know how to flirt? Like, because that's pretty important in dating, right? There's a bunch of actual skills that go into the relationship process, which is exactly how people who like aren't good on paper find relationships, because they're actually good at being in a relationship. And that gets everyone to scratch their heads, because then it's like, okay, how do I do that? And that's where for a while, you know, the pickup artist community was like, here's how you do that. But I think a lot of their conceptions were like very toxic in nature and were born of resentment, right? So what they like really taught people to do is objectify women, because once you make them an object, then they're less able to hurt you. So like in order to get over your own insecurity, we're going to objectify the person on the opposite side of the table. And therefore, like, you know, they're like a bot. Treat them like a bot, like they're not a human being with thoughts and feelings. And you'll sort of hear this kind of dialogue, right? Like you'll even, it's not just the pickup artist community in terms of men and women. You'll sort of see this with women as well. Well, they'll come up with like, you know, these terms like scrotes, which are like dehumanizing terms for men. And the whole point is once you dehumanize someone, then like their judgment matters less to you. Once their judgment matters less to you, it's a little bit easier for you to interact with them, because then your insecurities are sort of not managed, but sort of bypassed. The problem is you're creating a relationship by dehumanizing the other person. And it lets you get over the initial hump, but it dooms your relationship to failure, because now you're in a relationship with someone who you've dehumanized. So the only kind of person that's going to stay in that relationship is someone who's very insecure themselves, which is sort of what you see in these kind of dehumanizing dating communities, is that the ones that end up in relationships are the ones that end up with doormats. And then what they also do is they'll like sort of like, if you're not a doormat, they'll like come up with all these kind of weird terminologies and justifications for why you're low value, whatever. Right? This is where like we rank people. And so they do all these kinds of dehumanizing things. The key thing though is that checking boxes is important by all means. But if you're struggling in terms of dating, like communication skills is really what it comes down to. It's about articulating what you want, trying to understand and making an effort to understand what the other person wants. It's about articulating your boundaries, getting them to articulate theirs, respecting their boundaries, having them respect yours, but also in sort of compromising certain boundaries, which is like eye-opening. Oh my God, I'm supposed to compromise a boundary? That's insane. It's my boundaries. People should respect it. I should be able to eat Cheetos and play World of Warcraft for 28 hours a day if that's what I want to do. That's my boundary. That's what I need. How dare other people cause me to respect, like alter my boundary? We're not saying be a doormat, right? We're not saying like let people necessarily disrespect them. But generally speaking, a big part of relationships is compromise, because each of y'all wants slightly different things or very different things. And so succeeding in the relationship is about talking about compromise. But that's not what we learn. We don't learn how to communicate with people. We don't learn how to flirt. We don't learn how to have a conversation around boundaries. We don't learn how to express discomfort with someone. We don't learn how to manage resentment. So a post that we looked at earlier today was all about, like this girlfriend dumping this guy because she's like, I need more than you. And that's like the reason that relationship was doomed to fail is because this feeling started way before the person breaks up with you, but they were never able to articulate it, so y'all were never able to work on it. So it's like articulation, communication, listening, voicing what you want. Because a lot of times it's really hard to voice the things that we feel embarrassed for. This is ultimately what leads to successful relationships. I've had the privilege of looking into a lot of different successful relationships. And you may assume for a moment that, oh, you're a psychiatrist. Does that mean you just look at broken relationships? No. A lot of the people that come into my office are not coming for relationship problems. They're coming for other things. Right? They have ADHD. And the only reason they survive is because they have a rock steady relationship with someone who supports them through and through. So I've seen good relationships, and I've seen people come in for like couples counseling. And what I tend to find time and time again, and this is what you'll hear from people, is like communication is the foundation of a good relationship. So the question is then people get confused because it's like, I'm a doctor. I make $400K a year. I don't understand why I'm still single. It's because you spend all your time assuming that checking a particular box will make you successful in a relationship. And this is a perception that dating apps reinforce. So this is something that's really important to understand. We tend to act based on what we can measure. But it's not clear that what we measure actually correlates with success. Do y'all get that? So one of the most frustrating things about science is that there are certain things that we can measure and certain things that correlate with success. And those aren't actually the same thing. So I'm going to show you all some research about this that just exemplifies this point. So there's a lot of research about client and therapist matching, because we can measure certain things about a client and we can measure certain things about a therapist. Okay? Like there's certain things we can measure demographics, right? We can measure ethnicity. We can look at the ethnicity of the client. We can look at the ethnicity of the therapist. All right? And so people have been trying to figure out how to match clients with therapists for a long time. Let's see if this pops up. Oh, GG. Okay, GG. Psychotherapy outcome is a function of therapist-patient matching on selected variables. So you can look at this for a long time. Essentially, what you discover is that it's really hard to predict. So my synthesis of the evidence is that you can measure particular things about a client and you can measure particular things about a therapist, but matching based on those variables really doesn't correlate success. So even if you look at sort of these meta-analyses, the purpose of this article is to examine whether therapy process and outcome are influenced by client, therapist, ethnicity, language, or gender match. A review of research in this area does not demonstrate support for a client-therapist match on any of these variables. Right? Like, what the... Okay? So I like this. This thing says that there's... So what this essentially says, this article says that if you want to be a successful therapist, it's not about match. Being a successful therapist is about adapting to the client's worldview. It's not about matching people. We see success when the therapist adapts to the client. This paper I really love because this paper wants to say we can match, but it bends over backwards in order to make this argument. Okay, I'm going to read this. Okay, this is going to be a bit technical. So unfortunately, most of this research has dealt with analog populations of clients or therapists, quasi-therapy environments, and criteria that are far removed from those used to judge clinical settings. As a result of such disparity among methods and propulsions, the results of this research in this area are far from consistent. Do you guys understand what this is actually saying? This is saying we weren't able to find a clear effect. And then they go on to say, nonetheless, if we ignore all the reasons why the research is bad and we can't really come to a conclusion, if one considers only the most clinically relevant studies, some tentative conclusions do emerge. Do you all understand what this paper is saying? This paper is like, here's a body of evidence. If we discard most of it and we choose to have a selection bias, tentative conclusions do emerge. And then they go on to conclude, namely, demographic similarity between client and therapist facilitates positive perceptions of the relationship. So then they form a conclusion. They're like, oh, facilitates positive perceptions, enhances commitment to remaining in therapy, in treatment, especially among disadvantaged groups. But this sentence right here, these couple sentences on the left, basically are like, this isn't even correct. Cherry picking at its finest. Well said, S. Borealis. So this is what's so confusing, is that when we look at and if we look at the therapy relationship, And we can go on. So this looks at this thing, for example, finds this defensive style and internal external focus does predict outcomes. Matching patient reactance potential to therapist directiveness does not affect outcomes. It's just like another paper for the sake of completeness. The key takeaway here is that if we look at the client doctor-client relationship, or the therapist-client relationship, it's a relationship that like communication and intimacy and alliance and like all this like interpersonal stuff really matters. And people for a long time were like, okay, like if I'm an Indian therapist, I'm going to do better with an Indian client because I understand what it means to be Indian. If I'm a gay therapist, I'll do better with a gay client because I understand what it means to be gay. If I'm a man, I'll do better at working with men. We have all these assumptions about boxes that we can check and how they form relationships. It turns out when you actually look at the data, it doesn't work like that. And what really forms connections is not something that we know how to measure. But this is the main thing that dating apps do not, I think they understand it, they just don't tell anyone, right? Because there's only certain things that we can measure. So we're going to let you fill out a profile, but like we know on the back end, if you look at the data, we know that like nothing that you're filling out is actually going to correlate with relationship success. Because we can't actually measure the stuff. We can't build a profile that will allow you to successfully match people, which is staggering for people. And then what happens is we start forming selections based on what can be measured. But remember, what can be measured doesn't actually correlate with like relationship success. So now we start filtering people based on things like religion. We start filtering people based on height. We start filtering people based on income. Or we start filtering people based on political beliefs. And because how do we filter people? We filter people based on what the app lets us filter people with. And so essentially what we're doing is we're making selections that don't correlate with actual relationship success. And this is the fundamental problem with online dating. The most fundamental problem is it gives us this idea that if I build a profile, people will be able to select. And I will be able to select based on other people's profiles. Obviously. There's a key thing that's missing here, which is that your selection may have nothing to do with the actual likelihood that your relationship succeeds. And if we look at comparable, I mean, this is a stretch, obviously. So the therapist-client relationship is far from, a romantic relationship. It should be anyway. But it's still like a deeply personal relationship, and we sort of know from relationship matching metrics, right? Because the other thing about the dating apps is they're not going to publish their internal research. So they can make all kinds of claims, but you're never going to get peer-reviewed studies on these factors, right? And like, why not? It's because on the back end, the whole friggin' thing may be an absolute scam. And if you actually give your data set to third-party researchers to look at it, they'll say, hey, none of this crap actually works. And then the dating app is like, well, then we don't have a service that people are willing to... If people realize it doesn't work, like no one's going to use our apps, there's no way that they're going to do that. They're not going to publish their outcomes. Right? What they're all going to say is we have these proprietary metrics, which is sort of fair. And I'm sure that they're trying to figure it out. I just don't know that like we can capture this stuff in the way that, is actually useful to people. And then people get really frustrated with online dating and they sort of think like, okay, I'm screwing up or people are assholes, right? Like you think the world is terrible or like I'm incompetent or something. You either blame the person on the other end of the app or you blame yourself. Whereas the truth is the whole system is screwed up. So actually, I think a good example of someone who does this well, ironically, I mean, take this with a grain of salt, is I understand that Grindr actually filters based on location and distance. So like what they've actually done is realize that the most important variable is like the distance between two people, right? Which is like sort of makes sense. And this is where it's kind of interesting because here's an interesting statistic. I don't know, I may be a little bit rusty on this, but you know what variable of a relationship drastically increases the likelihood of divorce? I want to say it increases the likelihood of divorce by between 50 and 100%. Guesses. What do people think? Banter, addiction, having kids. a commute longer than 45 minutes. Can you believe that? A commute, a friggin' commute, longer than 45 minutes drastically increases the likelihood of divorce. But like the dating app doesn't have that as a criteria. This is actually what correlates with divorce, is having a commute that's longer than 45 minutes. So we don't know what actually makes a successful relationship. I mean, we sort of do. It's communication skills, I think, is the most important thing. But like, this is why dating is so screwed up, because like it's giving us all of these preferences that don't correlate with the actual thing that we're using the dating app for, which is to find a relationship. And if you're looking for hookups and stuff, that's also where Grindr may be a little bit different. Like, who knows? Right? And so then we spend so much time, and then like the other thing that happens is like it reinforces all these negative ideas. Oh yeah, women like don't date me because of my jawline, or because I'm not a sigma, alpha, beta, omicron, omni, theta, delta, beta male. Right? But like, and people like form all these ideas where it's like, no, it has nothing to do with your jawline. It's just like, you don't know how to like communicate with people. Right? Right? And so like we formulate all these different things, but like the thing is like all that crap, the sigma male, alpha male, beta male, theta male, futa male, omicron, right? Morpheus male. That's great. Morbid male. Morbid male should be like a competitor for Gmail. Every time you open up an email, it's Morbid time. So here, like, okay, so big takeaways. First thing to understand is that if you think that your dating success is determined by everything that happens before you meet the person, chances are you're wrong. So this is like my profession. It's not that it doesn't matter. It's that like everyone's focusing on everything before you even meet the person. Whereas if you really think about a relationship starts with like meeting a person and communicating and interaction. So everyone sort of assumes that, okay, like if my jawline isn't good enough, or I don't make enough money, or I'm not 6 feet tall, or this kind of crap, then like I'm doomed to be alone. It's just not the case, because that's not, like, we have a lot of data that shows that people who are assholes in your book get a lot of women and you don't because you're a nice guy. And it's not about being a nice guy or being an asshole. It's about how you communicate and interact with an actual human being. And you look at these like dating profiles and it hurts, right? Because you're not 6 feet tall. And you see all these profiles out there that are women looking for men who are 6 feet tall, or men who are looking for women who are like 5'2" and are like Instagram models or whatever. And so both sides of the equation, there's a lot of judgment, because these are the things that we can measure. This is what we can build a profile based on. And there's an assumption that selecting someone's based on profile things will correlate with the likelihood of a successful relationship. That fundamental assumption, I do not know is correct. I haven't seen data that is overwhelmingly positive in that even selecting based on these criteria leads to a successful relationship. And even when I look at successful relationships, what I tend to find is that there's like at least one red flag. And the key thing about those relationships is that despite the fact that there's a red flag, the people work through that red flag together. And that's when the relationship becomes really strong. So for example, I do a lot of addiction work. Sometimes what that means is the people who are married in my office are addicts, or hopefully are in recovery. And what I tend to find is like, yeah, it sucks to be like addicted to heroin, and it sucks to be married to someone who's addicted to heroin. But both of y'all got together, you decided that you loved each other enough and you were going to give this a try. Both of y'all set your egos aside, you set particular boundaries, you kind of screwed up a little bit, but you gave it an honest effort. And then 2 years later, you've been sober for 2 years and you decide to get married, and like, that's a strong relationship. If you think a little bit about that, like how do you correlate that to a dating app? By the way, I'm an addict. By the way, I'm willing to date addicts. No, like that's ridiculous, right? Like you don't, So what actually leads to successful relationships is not something that dating app profiles can necessarily capture. And then we got it all bent out of shape because we don't have a good enough profile, or there are people who are looking for things in their profile. It doesn't friggin' matter. At the end of the day, it's about how you communicate and interact with an individual human being. End of story. And there's research to even suggest that all this kind of demographic matching, at least in terms of client therapists, and you can make an argument that that's not the case for romantic relationships, but I think we're sort of seeing that people are willing to, you'll have people of mixed race couples, you'll have mixed religion couples, you'll have mixed diet couples, and you'll have people who are not those mixed things, right? You'll have ethnically homogenous couples, you'll have religiously homogenous couples, you'll have diet homogenous couples. And so if we have both versions, what that sort of concludes is that there may not, like, that's not restrictive, like, because we see both versions. We'll see a mixed race couple and we'll see a homogenous race couple. Ergo, race may not be an important factor. It's really just about how you communicate in either of those situations. Does that make sense? So if you're struggling to date, like, don't get resentful just because you're less than 6 feet. I mean, I understand it's okay to get resentful, but like, just because you get resentful doesn't mean that that's the reason that you're single. And there's a lot of stuff that you can still work on. And chances are, if you're like resentful towards, you know, the group of people that you're dating, like, focus on interpersonal skills. What is it like to spend an hour with you? Is it fun? What is it like to spend an hour with the other person? Do you know how to do things like set and respect boundaries? Do you know how to do things like listen and talk? Do you know how to do things like be emotionally available, but also be able to turn off your emotional availability when the other person like needs you to like self-compose? Because sometimes people are in relationships and they're like emotionally available. They wear their emotions on their sleeve, and they can never turn their emotions off. So my emotions are out there all the time, gushing out, and then it can be overwhelming for the other person. So what you've got to do is be able to turn on and off emotions, right? These are the core things that a relationship is built around. Do you have a big pee-pee? So this is another common thing. So let's just understand this quickly. So it's my understanding that there are people out there at Pride Month who are lesbians, and they have very satisfying sex lives. And it turns out that their pee-pees are incredibly small. In fact, non-existent. Right? So all these kinds of myths about stuff like penis size and stuff like that, like, it's just not, like, people can have healthy sexual relationships without penises. I don't know, like, it sounds absurd. I'm not trying to be funny. Honestly, I'm not trying to be funny here. But do y'all, like, get that? Like, that's possible. And so in terms of a healthy relationship, it's about, like, communication and trying to figure out, like, how you can provide for the other person, how the other person can provide for you. I'm not saying that people aren't allowed to have a preference. If someone doesn't want to spend time with you because of the size of your penis, like, that's on them. And it kind of sucks for you. But at the end of the day, people have healthy sexual relationships without penises. It's like literally a thing that people do. And if they can do it, you can do it. Talk about the wrong thing to say during streaming. Floppy Wappus is saying, I'm a girl and it's hard finding a girlfriend. My condolences. So Style is saying, but lesbians know the hardware better. Yeah, so like you can learn, right? If you weren't born with it, you can still learn. Is there a good way to use a dating app given what you talked about? Absolutely. So that's a great question, Doughboy. So the main thing to understand about dating apps is when you go in, having the right expectation. So there's still a tool. It's how most people still connect. But it's like acknowledging that it's a little bit of a crapshoot. The other thing is that you should be careful about filtering your preferences. So if you have particular preferences, like the actual interpersonal, the spark, the chemistry is not determined by both of y'all having the same religion, right? There are people who have the same religion or set of values or vegan who will get divorced. Like you'll see like divorce in like, based on demographic criteria, like you'll see divorce on both sides, right? So you'll have like Muslims who marry Muslims and they'll get divorced, and you'll have Muslims who marry Hindus and they'll get divorced. Like it happens. You'll have Hindus who marry Hindus and they'll get divorced. So that's where be like a little bit more open. So I think the first thing is to understand that if someone is perfect on paper, they may not be perfect in real life. And if someone is imperfect on paper, they may be perfect in real life. So that's, I think, the most important adjustment to take away, is to expand your dating pool and to give people an opportunity that you would normally filter out. So if you have like a height requirement, like loosen it. If you have an educational requirement or a financial requirement, loosen it. Give people a chance. And recognize that successful relationships are not about finding the perfect partner. They're about each of you becoming the perfect partner over time because you're committed to each other. Like you're not like any kind of like this is the key thing, which is like somehow like lost. This is another bias that the dating apps reinforce, which is like, here is who you are on a single piece of paper, right? Like, here is what you are. Take it or leave it. When you started dating me, I said very clearly in my profile that I will never watch Morbius. And you're asking me to watch it. Like, relationships are about growing and changing together. It's not about two finished products perfectly fitting together. Does that make sense? So just, I would say like loosen your checkbox criteria some and give people a shot. And recognize that if you find the perfect person on paper, that may not actually correlate to relationship success. Yeah, so arranged marriage in a culture. Okay, great question. So what about arranged marriages in culture? Okay. So what was the second one on the poll? Was it meditation or was it the arranged marriage thing? Do y'all remember? Okay, meditation. So let's talk about meditation then. We'll try to do this quick. Okay. So let's take a look at a couple of things about meditation. All right, this is kind of like, I personally wanted to talk about this. Hopefully it'll be helpful. It'll be kind of interesting. So let's take a quick look at understanding what meditation actually is and how it works. So I've been meditating only for several weeks, but I see temporary results every time I meditate. Is this placebo effect? My laziness is gone. I feel more myself. I become more sensitive to sounds. I feel more independent, so to speak. This lasts for probably an hour. Am I the only one feeling this? Is this a placebo effect? And related, I meditated 1 hour per day for 365 days, and here's why I stopped after a year. I was thinking about how to improve my character in general. I had nothing in mind that I wanted to change about myself. I knew basically nothing about meditation and reckoned it was some sort of superpower of the mind. So rather spontaneously, I committed to meditate 1 hour a day for a year. The remarkable effects on my life. Meditation sessions began to be enjoyable, beautiful parts of my day. The peace of mind and clarity I experienced were priceless. In social interactions, I felt much calmer. All of a sudden, I was recognizing consciously so many social cues that people give all the time. I surely reacted to those cues before having started meditation, but now it became conscious. The reason I stopped. In some sense, my initial motivation of learning meditation as a superpower of the mind was satisfied. I got to see how my perception and scope of consciousness expanded. However, meditation alone will not make you a good person. It's not a one type fits all solution. And for me personally, it felt like I should focus on other things. Very glad I did this deep dive because now I know the power of this tool. And whenever I should need it in my life, I can return to daily practice. So that's kind of weird, right? So like, how does this work? Because here's this person who's sort of saying, my laziness is gone. I feel more like myself. This person is saying, okay, my social interactions are better. It's sort of a superpower of the mind. So what does meditation do? And how does it work? Because a lot of times the challenge is that you'll read posts like this, right? You'll see like, oh, wow, like this person was more like calm in social interactions. This person, like their laziness is gone. Like, that's awesome. Oh my God. You'll also hear people say like, oh, like I transform, like I'm a completely different person after I started meditating. Meditation has changed my life, has revolutionized who I am as a person. I gained so much perspective. Other people will talk about, oh, meditation like helped me overcome my anxiety. So if you're there kind of scratching your head and you're like, how does this meditation stuff work? What does this mean? Like, and we don't talk about enlightenment, right? It's like, what does that even, we stop talking about it. Like people just stop talking about it at some point. But that's like sort of like in the background. Like I've heard of this thing. I know that's sort of what Buddha was about, but like everyone's like, yeah, I'm spiritually Buddhist. Oh, like, do you know what enlightenment? No, mindfulness. Well, like no one knows. Like, what the hell is the deal with meditation? Is it a treatment for anxiety? Is it some way to transform your personality? Is it a way to get rid of laziness for an hour? Like what happens? Like, what's the deal here? Okay, so let's try to understand this. So the way that I'd explain this is meditation works on 3 different levels. It works on the 8-minute level, the 8-week level, and the 8-month level. And then arguably 8 years, if you want to go that far. Okay? So the first thing that we know that meditation does is on the 8-minute level. So people will say, when I meditate, I feel good for the duration of the meditation or soon afterward. So what effects in the physiology and in neuroscience function on the level of 8 minutes? So this is where we sort of get autonomic nervous system. So meditation will do things like adjust our respiratory rate. Generally speaking, will lower our pulse, will lower our blood pressure. Generally speaking, will reduce cortisol and adrenaline and activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is usually what it does for people. But it can also activate the sympathetic nervous system, which in turn will lead to things like reduced laziness, more motivation. And this in turn will do things like decrease anxiety, decrease insomnia, right? It'll help us sleep. It'll help us chill out. So this is physiologic in nature. So we know that when we meditate, on the order of minutes, your physiology will change. Things like hormone balances will change. Your sympathetic nervous system, parasympathetic nervous system will switch. And this is also what's confusing for some people. Some people will say it improves my anxiety. Some people will say it improves my laziness. How can it do both? It kind of wakes me up. It kind of calms me down. That's the cool thing about meditation. It tends to balance your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. Now, over the course of 8 weeks, what starts to happen? We start to see clinical benefits. So what's going on here? So 8 weeks is where we also start to see neuroscience changes. So for example, when we reduce our cortisol, cortisol is a stress hormone, that acts for about 4 to 24 hours. And it's kind of like a steroidal hormone, which means that it travels into our cells and alters gene transcription. So it like builds cellular machinery. So what that sort of does is it like, I don't know how to say this, it's not just a temporary effect. It constructs the machinery that our cells will use over the next day, 2 days, 3 days. So when we meditate on a consistent basis, our cells literally start to function in like a different way. And as they start to function in a different way, we'll start to see neuroplastic changes. So over the course of 8 weeks, we'll see strengthening of the frontal lobes. Okay? So what does this mean? Our frontal lobes are the brakes of the brain. So what they do is they'll like calm down our emotions. Inhibition. So they allow us to like behave less reactively. You know, when we sort of say like, take a step back. Like I got caught up in this and I wasn't able to take a step back, or I was able to take a step back. Or the frontal lobes also do things like reduce impulsivity. And people with ADHD, we sort of know that people with ADHD have poor frontal lobe control on other parts of their brain. So people with ADHD, for example, get more emotionally dysregulated more easily. And they're unable to control their impulses. So what we start to see is that essentially we start becoming, let's say, like, let's just use the example of emotional reactivity. So we know that in 8 weeks of meditation, we can see clinical benefits in anxiety. And what does that mean? So generally speaking, we'll look at, like, for example, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So that means that human beings are less impacted by their anxiety. So if I have a clinical anxiety disorder, my anxiety keeps me from doing things like going to a party, or when I go to a party, the anxiety becomes so strong that it takes control of me. And then I react to the emotion. Either I rush out the door, or I don't go in the first place, or I feel overwhelmed, or whatever. So our emotional reactivity is high in a case of a generalized anxiety disorder. And when we meditate, this decreases. And how does that decrease? It's because our frontal lobes are getting stronger at inhibiting our emotions. Okay, so what does this mean? This means that I can go to parties. If I'm less emotionally reactive, it also adjusts social things. Now, this is the piece where things I think people sort of lose sight of. How does meditation transform your life over the course of 8 months or 8 years? How does it cause you to be a different person? This stuff we understand really well scientifically. Now, if you behave less emotionally reactively, imagine what that does for, let's say, a romantic relationship. So let's say your partner doesn't text you or doesn't respond to your text in 24 hours, and you really need their help. If you give in and you have a high amount of emotional reactivity, you feel really upset, you yell at your partner, you're like, I can't believe, like, I'm always there for you, I always respond to your texts, you don't respond to my texts, you don't care, right? So as you increase your emotional reactivity, it negatively impacts the relationship. And then what happens is eventually, if let's assume that the emotional reactivity is so bad, you attack them for not responding to you. Say, you don't care about me. I'm always there for you. You're never there for me. This leads to a breakup. 3 months later, you're dating someone else. Romance number 2. You still have this emotional reactivity. They don't respond to your texts within 24 hours. You say the same thing. I'm there. I always answer my texts. You know, anytime you need me, I'm there for you. But when I need you, you're not there for me. Negatively impacts the relationship. Because you start attacking them. Because it's not just necessarily your fault, right? So even if they forgot to pick you up at the airport, let's say they actually made a mistake that we can all agree on. But then what happens is, like, you react to them so emotionally. Like, what happens when other people attack you? You get defensive. You attack back. You hit back. Right? So emotional reactivity is, like, not healthy, generally speaking, in relationships. And so as this happens a third time and a fourth time, all these get put together, and then you start to form beliefs. So this is where in CBT we talk about core beliefs or schemas, right? And generally speaking, like, human beings will have repeated experiences. And as we have repeated experiences, we start to formulate conclusions about the world. And so what this person will conclude is, I'm there for people, but they are never there for me. They'll conclude things like people are untrustworthy. They'll conclude these kinds of things. Then they'll go living their life over the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years with this belief. As they live with this belief, plus the emotional reactivity, romantic relationship number 5, 6, and 7 are screwed. Because now you're going into the relationship fundamentally believing that people are untrustworthy. Plus the emotional reactivity. Oh, there it is again. I knew it. I knew it. It almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is what happens in people's life, right? We tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. We feel trapped by our circumstances. So a good example of this is like, I believe that my partner is cheating on me. And then I ask them, hey, are you cheating on me? No. I check their phone because I don't believe them. Because people are cheaters. As I check their phone, I get away with it the first time, don't get away with it, get away with it the second time, third time, fourth time. Then they find out that I'm snooping. Damages the trust. And then like eventually like I emotionally drive them away. They start connecting to someone else on an emotional level. I knew it. They're having an emotional affair. We break up. 3 months later, they're dating that damn, I knew that. I knew it. It's true all along. Becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And this is what happens in our life, right? So like people don't make new mistakes every single day. We tend to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. These are mistakes around self-worth. Like I don't care about myself. I don't know how to love myself. I have difficulty overcoming my anxiety. I procrastinate. We tend to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. So this shapes our life, right? On the order of magnitude, if we're talking about the time, this is 8 months or even 8 years. And if you look at people who are like narcissistic, for example, like this is a classic example of they emotionally react to things. As people get upset with them for their emotional reactions, what they'll start to do is like form narcissistic belief structures. Their narcissistic belief structures drive people away, and then they form these conclusions like, no, I can't, no one in the world loves me. Like I'm always the victim. No one cares about me as a person. Y'all get that? So what does meditation have to do with this? Let's go back to 8 weeks. So if I reduce emotional reactivity, if I strengthen my frontal lobes, right? Because that's how long it takes to make these kind of neuroscientific changes. And specifically what we're talking about is the frontal lobe being able to inhibit the amygdala. So this is not like a personality change. This is literally like being able to take a step back from your emotions and not letting them control you in the matter of minutes. So for a 5-minute time span, when your emotions would have taken control, you prevent them from taking control and you remain calm and collected. What impact does that have on your relationships? What impact does that have if you don't lash out, hey, and you can communicate with people more calmly? For relationship number 1, they didn't answer your text. Hey, by the way, I texted you a day ago, and I texted you a couple other times and you didn't get back to me. Like, what's going on? Is everything okay? Instead of immediately jumping to some kind of emotional hurt, which is like, this person doesn't care about me, what's going on? Is something going on? By the way, I know it's kind of like a little frustrating thing that I'm working on, but I'm like really sensitive to when people don't get back to me on text. So like, I don't know if you've noticed, but I always make it a point to try to respond to your text if you ask me anything. And I'm like particularly sensitive to this. I'm going to do my best working on it. And thank you for letting me know that you were actually completely stressed out and that like this other crap was going on in your life. I had no idea. And I understand now why you didn't text me. Because you approach the conversation calmly. You don't react emotionally. You foster communication. Right? And so if you do all these things and you listen to them and you like are open-minded, they're going to be open-minded as well. So instead of going on the attack and them sort of becoming defensive, you're kind of like looking at things more calmly, right? You're coming across as more reasonable. You guys problem solve together. And then what does that change? So how does that alter the course of your relationship? Right? So then suddenly, no breakup. I'm oversimplifying here for a minute. But it's like, oh, wow, like people actually like acknowledge that I have needs and stuff like that, and they're able to like try to accommodate those. And so over time, let's say that eventually you do break up. And then you enter relationship 2, and the same thing happens. There's conflict. You reduce your emotions or your emotional reactivity. It's not just reducing the experience of emotions. You're not numbing them. You're not reacting to them. So you're still feeling them. You're acknowledging them. You're noticing them, and you're keeping them in control. And then what happens is you communicate. But then somewhere along the way, if we look at this like, you know, the beliefs that people are forming, that you're forming over here, as relationship 2 happens, as relationship 3 happens, as relationship 4 happens, the beliefs that you're forming based on these interactions are actually different. Because as you have these calm interactions with people, you can start to like assign different reasons. It's not that people are untrustworthy. It's that sometimes people want different things, right? And breakup 2 happens. And breakup 3 happens. And then you conclude people change. So the kinds of beliefs that you start to form once you stop reacting to people emotionally change. Right? So the way that you communicate with this person, you don't like stick them in a corner. And I don't know if you guys like have friends who will put you in a corner through their behavior. Like, I don't know if that sort of makes sense, but I'm kind of envisioning like there's some people, for example, in relationship dynamics that will like love to bear their cross and they'll always play the victim. And like, if you're always like, if you have someone in your life who's always playing the victim, they kind of force you into being the bad guy. And the more that they force you into being the bad guy, they keep you in the relationship through guilt, but they don't actually build a healthy relationship. And then eventually you pull away because you can't deal with that crap anymore. And then that person gets their beliefs reinforced. Oh, people abandon me. And then they drive the next person crazy until they abandon them. And they drive the next person crazy until they abandon them. And then they like end up with this core belief that like people are always going to abandon me. What they don't realize is that they have a hand in it. What they don't realize is that they have control over it. And so when you end up with this conclusion that the world is an unwinnable place, I'm playing an unwinnable game, that's devastating and leads to hopelessness. And you lose perspective on life, and life sucks. And then when you do something as simple as meditate, at the 8-week mark, you can control your emotional reactivity a little bit better. As you control your emotional reactivity, as you become aware of your internal emotional state, and you vocalize that in a way that's calm and not emotionally reactive, it alters the dynamic of your relationships. As it alters the dynamic of relationships, the lessons that you learn from those relationships start to be different. This, in turn, alters your worldview. Alters your core beliefs. I am a good person. I am lovable. If someone leaves me, it's not because I'm fundamentally broken. People can have all kinds of reasons to leave a relationship with me. Y'all get that? And so now we get to the 8-month mark. So this too is a neuroscience change, because we know that core beliefs and schemas are represented in the brain somewhere. right? Doesn't map onto a perfect circuit, but like somewhere in our association cortices, like we know that personality is ensconced in the brain and that core beliefs are ensconced in the brain somewhere. And so we start to see these kinds of things. And then if you do this for 8 years, then suddenly like you see the world differently. Like you have hope, right? Because people don't fundamentally abandon you because you're a bad person. You don't believe that. And so then what it does is alters your outlook on life. So then you're not a doomer anymore. You're someone who has hope. You're someone who's like compassionate. And why are you compassionate? Because you have empathy. Why do you have empathy? Because over 10 relationships, you've learned how to not be emotionally reactive, communicate with the other person in a healthy way, and have been able to see like the positive humanity in them. Right? And then you become like a different human being because you just see the world in a completely different way. And this is what's so confusing, because when people talk about stuff like this, like I can say meditation transformed my life. I can say that a big part of Dr. K was born after 7 years of meditating and like studying in different ashrams in India. And then you're kind of sitting there scratching your head because when you meditate for 8 minutes and you're seeing this change, you're like, where the hell is the personality change? Like, and then you do it for a month, but you haven't hit the 8-week mark. And so then, you haven't seen a clinical benefit. Like I'm doing this for the sake of anxiety, and my anxiety is good for like the 15 minutes that I meditate. But after 1 month, I'm not seeing the neuroplasticity that we need for a clinical benefit. Well, yeah, that's because that takes a little bit more time. And even if you see the clinical change in your anxiety, you'll kind of see this as well. We even saw this in this post where this person is kind of like, okay, I understand the superpower of the mind that was satisfied, but this person hasn't made the personality changes yet, right? Like they've seen like the 8-month changes, but they haven't seen like the lifelong changes because they're not even looking for those. They're working on self-development through other ways. Believe me, this person will come back to meditation, almost guaranteed. And so this is how meditation works. And this is what's so confusing for people, is because people hear about meditation, they hear about these benefits, but no one sort of like explains like how the benefits of meditation happen, in what order they happen. And essentially what meditation does is works on 3 to 4 different levels. The first, it works on a physiologic level and calms you down only while you're meditating. And so this is why we can say, okay, take deep breaths. If you're panicking, like take 3 deep breaths. It works for all human beings because it's physiologic. It's like literally the way that our body is built. And then people will get that benefit, but they're like, where's the reduction in anxiety? Where's the reduction in depression? That takes 8 weeks. And then if you meditate for 8 weeks and you start to see those clinical benefits, like you're like, okay, when do I start seeing human beings as fundamentally compassionate? When do I start to love myself? Sure, I have like reduced my symptoms of depression. I've reduced my symptoms of anxiety, but I still don't have this like self-worth that like these meditators seem to have. When do I get that? And then we see something really, really important. I think this is what's really missed, is that when we reduce our emotional reactivity and we start to see clinical benefits, that alters our individual interactions with the rest of the world. When I get dumped, instead of getting resentful, I meditate a little bit, I calm down a little bit. I'm still bummed out, but I can acknowledge the sadness without giving into it. Right? So I cultivate that observing self, which is able to notice the sadness and still grieve and then still sort of like sit with it. And everyone's like, how do I sit with it? And as you learn how to sit with sadness, it doesn't eat you away from the inside. And then like once you do that time and time and time again, over the course of 8 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, and you start to alter the way that you perceive the world, it shapes your interactions. As it shapes your interactions, because you're not emotionally reactive and you're not attacking people all the time, then what that does is like shapes your belief in humanity. And as your belief in humanity improves, your hope improves. Because now like we don't have to give up on humanity. Like most human beings are decent people that are struggling and sometimes make mistakes. Imagine if you believed that in your core of being, as opposed to most human beings fundamentally can't be trusted and will abandon me at some point. How will that transform your day-to-day interactions? The way that you wake up in the morning and what you think about. Every time you meet a new person, is it, oh crap, not this again? Or is it, wow, like look at this person is pretty cool. And then as you start to live your life with those core beliefs fundamentally changed, like then the world sort of gets almost like a positive bias where you acknowledge that some people still struggle but like it's not personal. It's just this person must be having a hard day. And then it starts to shape your life in a different direction. And as you shape your life in a different direction, it actually helps you do things like set boundaries. Have compassion for your parents who are like bigoted and don't want to accept you. And as you start to acknowledge, okay, wow, like this is like, they're never going to accept me for who I am. And that's sad and I can mourn that, but I don't have to hate them. They're a product of their environment. And even though they're a product of their environment, like I don't have to let them into my life if they're not willing to give me like what I need. This is what I need from them. And so you can you get a spine, right? You set boundaries with people and you're able to tolerate their negativity instead of giving into their negativity and appeasing them. And as you do that, you start to build healthier relationships and you cut out the negative people in your life because you don't need that crap. And you feel some amount of guilt. You acknowledge the guilt. So be it. Adios. Right? And then like your life is different because now you have a different set of peers. You have a different relationship. Your view of a human being is fundamentally different. And as you start to act in accordance with that, you become one step closer to Buddha. As you become one step closer to Buddha, like people respond to you differently. You start to attract like different kinds of people, right? People start treating you with respect. And that's pretty cool. And so then like that's what happens at the 8-year mark. Is like your life is completely different. And it gets tracked all the way back to your physiology. And so that's what confuses people is like, they look at some people who are meditating and they're like, yeah, meditation is my life would be completely different. And they're like, I don't get it because I've been doing this for a month and I can barely get my mind to sit still. And it's like, that's completely normal. Don't worry about it. This is how meditation changes you. This is how it alters your life fundamentally. Questions? What a great question. So Shiv26 is asking, what changes in a person if they game every day for 8 years? What a fantastic question. Let's find out. Okay. What a great question. So let's just run, because this is how change happens, right? So what we can actually do is we can look at gaming. Wow. Okay. So, beautiful question. So what happens in 8 minutes of gaming? What does 8 minutes of gaming do to your cortisol and adrenaline? What do y'all think? Who knows? What does it do to your physiology? No, it doesn't depress you. We're talking about physiology. So 8 minutes. Okay. So, all right. So people are talking about all kinds of things. So it's going to increase your adrenaline, maybe even increase your cortisol. Okay. So what it also, so it does these kinds of things. And remember, cortisol alters genetic function, genetic transcription, right? So then what's going to happen is your brain is going to be creating like pro-stress machinery. So one example of this is cortisol actually creates adrenaline receptors. So cortisol makes you more susceptible to adrenaline and does things like increases amygdala sensitivity. So now you're more prone to fear. It does other things like this stuff is going to activate your reticular activating formation, which in turn makes it hard to sleep. Okay? So your reticular activating formation is the part of your brain that governs sleeping and wakefulness. And let's think about this from an evolutionary standpoint. If I saw a tiger and I ran away, what is my brain? How do I want to sleep that night? I want to be a super light sleeper. Y'all get it? Like, I don't want to fall asleep. I need any twig that snaps. I need to be able to wake up. So it makes it hard to sleep. So over the course of 8 minutes, good job, chat. Now, if you play for 8 hours, all of these effects are going to be increased. So now what we've done is we've given ourselves insomnia and we've given ourselves stress susceptibility. So what is that going to do over the course of 8 weeks? What clinical impact is that going to have? Let's look at the neuroscience, right? Because we said in 8 weeks of meditation, our frontal lobes control our emotional centers. So that's what meditation does. What impact does gaming have on our emotional centers? Gaming suppresses the experience of negative emotion. Okay, so it numbs it, right? So we understand that. Like if I play a game, even though I'm pissed at the game, if I'm worried about like something else in my life, like I need to make rent at the end of the month, I can forget about that fear or that anxiety by playing a game. So as we artificially shut off the amygdala, what do you think that does to our frontal lobe's ability to control the amygdala? Does that make sense? So frontal lobe, amygdala, it weakens, right? This connection weakens because it doesn't need to anymore. So the brain doesn't need to shut off the amygdala. The frontal lobe doesn't need to control your emotions because you've got a video game. And now we understand why games are so damn addictive. When I play the game, I feel totally fine. The second the game ends, I get cranky, I'm irritable, I get pissed off, I'm worried. I know if y'all are like I am, like when I was 20 years old and like I would go to bed at night and like all of the worries would come rushing back and I wouldn't be able to control them. They would overwhelm me like a tidal wave. I would get smashed. I had no control over my emotions because my frontal lobe control of my amygdala actually became like it atrophied. It got weaker because I'm using this external game to do the job for me. It's sort of like if I have a mechanized wheelchair all the time and I stop walking, what do you think is going to happen to my legs? They're going to atrophy, right? And the brain is the same way. If the frontal lobes don't need to control the amygdala, I'm going to lose control and like it's going to reduce my my control over emotional reactivity, which in turn means that I'm more emotionally reactive. So what does emotionally reactive mean? It means that I react more to my emotions. Essentially, my emotions control me. Now, if my emotions control me, what do you think that does over the course of 8 months? If I'm a slave to my emotion, I procrastinate more. I avoid more. Social anxiety gets worse. My relationships get worse. Right? So why does this happen? It's because I'm poor at handling conflict. I'm more avoiding in nature. All this kind of stuff happens. And then what happens? So as all of these things happen, how do you think this affects core beliefs? Boom. Doomer. And why not? I can't rely on people. The world is going to hell. My parents, I'm stuck with my parents. I'm saddled in debt. Everything's going wrong. Sucks to be me. The world is a hopeless place. And like, why not? Like, look at all this. Like, I can never do anything. I'm lazy. People should just give up on me. Like, all these kinds of thoughts start to come. And then what does that do over 8 years? Transforms your friggin' life. Completely different. Right? Beautiful question. Maps on perfectly to our model. And this is what we see with people who have unhealthy gaming over the course of 8 years. Their lives are in a completely different space. Right? So this is for people, so like, it's not just playing games. So like, I've been playing video games for the last decade of my life. This crap isn't happening to me. Why not? It's because it's not solely gaming, right? So the key thing is that you can play a game and it can be fun, but then I also, for example, will go for a walk, like almost on a daily basis. I will do things like yoga and exercise and meditate. So I'm doing other things that will, like, you know, suppress my gaming. And I also don't play games on a daily basis. You know, I probably game like between 1 and 4 days a week, depending on the week. And what I usually will do is play games for an extended period of time to where there's still like a lot of fun. So that's where like you'll see that this whole mechanism works for gaming as well. 100%. In fact, explains it very, very well. So great question. So Tiara Guy is saying, this is how I am with YouTube. I watch 40 plus hours of YouTube a week. So that's where, like, chances are, depending on what kind of YouTube you watch, that's going to have slightly different effects on your physiology. If you watch YouTube that riles you up, like politically charged content, you know, things like that, then you've got to be more careful. So Kyosho2 is asking, what if you reach the state of don't trust people after not meditating? How do you get out of that hole? The same way that I just laid out. I don't know how else to say this, but you start by meditating. As you meditate, it'll alter your emotional reactivity. I'm just oversimplifying things for sure, but this is just for the sake of explaining. It's going to alter all kinds of stuff. But as you start behaving less emotionally reactively, as you start not thinking black and white in terms of people in their relationships, it will alter the way that you interact with them. As you alter the way that you interact with them, they will alter the way that they interact with you. That will be the fertilizer that you put on a relationship that allows it to grow. As the relationship potentially grows, you'll form something of a friendship and may start to trust people. But it'll take probably months at a minimum, if not a couple of years, for you to learn how to trust people, because you have a lot of unlearning to do. Amir is asking, does everybody need a different kind of meditation? Given that everybody's physiology is different, everyone doesn't need a different kind of meditation. But I think a big part of what we advocate for here is that there are different meditation techniques that work differentially well for different people. So each person has a unique, I would say, cognitive fingerprint for whom there's a particular meditation set of techniques that may be very useful for you. So Beauregard is asking, what are the ways to meditate? I've never found success with cross-legged, sitting still meditation. That seems very common. Yeah, there are a ton of different ways to meditate. This is a part of the problem with the way that mindfulness essentially crossed the pond to the West. So there are tons of different techniques of meditation. Essentially, like 2 to 5% of them crossed over, and they became known as meditation. Whereas mindfulness is really from a subset of the Buddhist tradition. So if you look at big picture view, the first people who discovered meditation are probably the tantrics in ancient India. So they developed tantric meditation. Tantric meditation then spawned yoga. And then there are 4 branches of yoga, each of which has different meditation techniques. One branch of yoga is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is probably what Buddha's teachers taught him. So Buddha was a Raja Yogi. So he followed, there's Tantra, which has a couple of different limbs. And then that sort of spawned yoga. And then yoga has 4 branches. And then one branch of yoga is what Buddha learned. Then Buddha did his thing and started, I mean, he didn't really start a religion, but a religion popped up around him. And there are 3 kinds of Buddhism. There's Vajrayana, Mahayana, and Theravada. So these are the 3 kinds of Buddhism. And one segment of the Mahayana tradition is essentially mindfulness. And Zen gets born out of all that stuff and things like that. So if you really look at it, there's like a bunch of different branches that are like just as big and far as mindfulness is. But mindfulness is sort of the quote unquote sitting still meditation. And so what I would say, so let's do by the way, if y'all want details on this stuff, this is all in Dr. K's guide. So we go over like, what's the history of meditation? What are the fundamental different types of meditation? How do you find which meditation is right for you? So we'll give y'all a practice today that's a different kind than sitting still. Let me think about this. Okay, so I've got an interesting meditation for y'all today. It's kind of weird. So this is an inquisitive meditation. So for some people, forcing themselves to do something is challenging. So this is a meditation that you can do throughout your life. And essentially, I'm going to ask y'all a question and I want you to come up with the answer. So maybe what we'll do is like, let's say in 48 hours, like someone posts on Reddit and we'll see what people think about this technique, okay? What happens to pleasure when you observe it? That's the technique. So I want y'all to answer that question. So the way that you actually do this is engage in something pleasurable and observe it. And then like engage in something pleasurable without observing it. Okay, so everyone's answering now. Y'all are doing it wrong. And in fact, you have to be extra, extra careful. Because this is not meditation. So this is great. Y'all are falling into a pitfall. Okay, look at this. This is a pitfall. Okay, everyone is saying things like, you know, as you observe it, it decreases. As you observe it, it increases. As you observe it, this happens, that happens. Understand what your mind is doing right now, okay? Your mind is jumping to a deductive conclusion instead of an experience. You guys are not actually doing the meditative practice. You're coming up with a theoretical answer. Now, if you've done this experience before, then maybe you've got something there, right? So that you believe what you believe for a reason. But you'll see like y'all are, you know, it's like asking a bunch of virgins like which sexual position is best. And if I ask y'all and y'all are a bunch of virgins, Twitch chat is going to say this position is best. You're not even bothering to experiment. You're just like jumping to a conclusion, which is exactly what the mind loves to do. The mind doesn't actually want to do the practice. Right? So this may be a little bit unfair because some of y'all may have done this and some of y'all may have already figured this out because we've got good long-term meditators in here. So my apologies if I'm calling you out there. But I want you to... I want y'all to just be a little bit careful about notice what your mind does. That's the problem. That's the weakness of inquisitive practices, is that the mind loves to give you an answer without actually like doing the practice. It says, oh, this is what it must be. I already know this. I don't need to bother. And then you're not really doing it. So I want you to like literally take something and then get lost in it and then observe it and see what the difference is. Okay? For people who are saying failed already, no, that y'all haven't failed. No one has failed. Remember, if a student fails, whose responsibility is it? First responsibility is the teacher's, right? So that's like, it's a shortcoming of the way that I explain the technique. Observe the pleasure and notice what happens to the pleasure when you observe it. Can you give an example? Jeff K, sure. So for example, play a video game and get lost in the video game, and then play a video game and watch yourself playing the video game. Eat a piece of food without thinking about it, and then very mindfully, like eat a piece of food and look for the pleasure. Any pleasure. Okay, so let's find out. Okay, y'all do it. So people are saying sounds like it disappeared. Yeah, so find out, right? And then let's post about it. So today is Wednesday. So on Friday, let's make a post about it. And see what, post your responses on Reddit or Discord or something like that. All right, so just do something pleasurable. Just observe it and see what happens to pleasure. Who are we rating today? Ken? Hafu? Okay, we can rate Hafu. These nuts? Let's rate Hafu. It's Hafu, right? I typed that right? All right, we can rate Gotham Sagandis. Kind supporter recently got my LCSW. Congratulations. Dude, huge shout out. Man, woman, or whatever your gender is. I don't know what pronoun to use there, but huge shout out, kind supportive. Thank you so much for being a part of the community, and the world needs you to have that LCSW, so strong work. Take care. Arranged marriage convo we're going to have next time, okay? Love y'all, chat.